He had been a part of the police force for some time already. However, what he saw that day was something he couldn't really stomach. This officer may have seen many things, but this was something he wasn't prepared for. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Daily Dose, like, and share this video with your friends. As her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles started turning white. Her hands were starting to get clammy, and the sweat was building up around her forehead. She stared through the rearview mirror and watched as the police officer approached her car. She didn't want to panic, but she had a feeling she was in big trouble. She couldn't see how she could talk her way out of this one. As the seconds passed, the officer was coming closer and closer. She cursed her bad luck and prepared herself as the officer stood by the side of her window. She sucked in a deep breath and prepared for the worst. What was going to happen next, she was unsure. The past few months had already been rather tough on Ebony Rhodes. After she lost her mother, Ebony packed up her things and moved her entire family to Atlanta, Georgia. She wanted to have a fresh start, and she hoped this could be it. Ebony was a single mother of 4. This meant she had to hustle twice as hard so she could provide for her family. Moving to Atlanta also meant more job opportunities for her. However, it wasn't as easy as she imagined it to be. Ebony tried to keep this huge secret for the sake of her children. But as we all know, no secret can stay hidden forever. Even Ebony wasn't immune to that. Her secret was about to be exposed when this officer pulled her over. One afternoon, Ebony had driven her kids to the library. Finals were coming up, so she wanted them to study properly and do well in school. She knew this was the best way for them to have a better life than her. She was so deep in her thoughts about her children's future that she didn't notice the police car that was trailing her. When the siren lights went off, she snapped out of her thoughts and realized she was doomed. At that moment, Ebony instantly knew why the officer had asked her to pull over. She had an expired license plate, and she hadn't been able to replace it yet because of the lack of funds. But that wasn't just that. Ebony's license was also suspended, and she possessed no insurance. She knew deep in her heart that the officer would not be considerate of offenses like these. However, that wasn't what she was worried about the most. Her deep and terrible secret was now on the brink of exposure. When she thought about how this would affect her and her family, she couldn't help but start shedding tears. There really was no way out of the trouble she was currently in. Ebony's face was already soaked in tears by the time the police officer reached her window. He was surprised when he saw her sobbing. He came to the car and asked why I was crying, and I was like, "Well, because I know my license isn't good," she recalls. Sure enough, after the officers reviewed her papers, she informed Ebony that she had no other choice but to arrest her and impound her car. Ebony's heart sank deeper. This was the end of it. Her secret would be out. The officer brought her to the police station. There, Ebony called a co-worker and asked her to pick up her kids from school. She also asked her co-worker to inform her sister in Florida about the situation. Her sister was the only one she could trust to take care of her kids while she was in jail. But then again, that also meant she had to bring her kids to Florida, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to have them so far from her. However, she had more pressing matters to attend to. Once the police went through her car, she'd have to come clean and reveal her secret. Atlanta PD Deputy Chief Jeff Glazier was in his office when one officer knocked on his door. He waved her in, and she told him there was a situation with the Ebony case. As she and the other officers did a routine search of Ebony's impounded car, they had accidentally stumbled across something that explained why Ebony sobbed her eyes out earlier. Chief Glazier went to the impound lot to have a peek at the situation himself. "We have to do something about this," he said as soon as they realized what this all meant. Inside Ebony's car were numerous bags, backpacks, and other items. At first glance, you might think these are just hoarded items. But upon closer inspection, they realized something. Ebony and her children had been sleeping and living in this car. It seemed like this was their only home. Once Chief Glazier realized what was going on, he immediately went to Ebony's cell to have a chat with her. He let her know that they had gone through her car, and they saw lots of things that didn't belong there. That's when she opened up and told him their story. Since the family moved to Atlanta, Ebony had been doing shifts at a Walmart store. The pay wasn't much. She and 2 of her children had chronic health issues, so that only made expenses higher for them. Because she'd been unable to save up, she couldn't make a deposit on an apartment, so she and her family became homeless. For the past 6 months, they'd been living in that car. When Chief Glazier heard this story, his heart broke for the poor family. He could not imagine how this family managed their homelessness for half a year. There are 4 of them after all. Given that they also had things in their car, Chief Glazier could not imagine how cramped it must have been. One of Ebony's biggest struggles was finding a safe place to park the car at night so they could all rest. Sometimes, instead of sleeping, Ebony had to drive around and around from one place to another just to ensure their safety. A lot of times, I didn't sleep because the kids were asleep, Ebony recalls. I was watching to make sure nothing happened. No one tried to rob us, so we just stay right there in the car. Poor Ebony. Ebony felt humiliated that she had to subject her children to a situation like this, so she tried keeping quiet about it. For a while, nobody knew, but as we all know, no secret can stay hidden forever. When I got off work, we would just sleep right there in the parking lot in my car, she recalls. A lot of people didn't know that because I was still going to work. Whether she liked it or not, this wasn't how she wanted to raise her kids, and deep down she knew it. I apologized to my kids and let them know I'm sorry, she says, close to tears. For a while, things were still okay. Then, when the police pulled her over, she thought this was the end of it. They would now lose their only home. However, Ebony wasn't completely right, because when Chief Glazier heard about their situation, he decided to do something about it. This woman may have broken the law with her car issues, but he wasn't going to allow a family to lose their home. Chief Glazier decided to ring the director of a family homeless shelter. He had met the director recently and wanted to see if they could help. I called her up and said, "Listen, I've got a family of 5, including 3 boys and a girl, and he's 17, he recounts. And she goes, "Yeah, I have some room. And if you know anything about shelters in the middle of winter, there's nothing available," and she had something available. I couldn't believe it. Neither could Ebony. Chief Glazier then went to Ebony to tell her the wonderful news. "When he called me that day, I just started crying because I'd been trying to get into different shelters for a long time," she said, wiping away at her cheek. "No one would ever accept us," she says. She felt overjoyed because her children would now have a proper roof over their heads, albeit temporary. But Chief Glazier didn't do just that. He did something Ebony did not expect at all. Chief Glazier started a fundraising drive among the people in their police department staff, so Ebony's family would have the funds for a deposit and get their life started somehow. For a while, it did help. However, they soon realized that the money they collected would not be enough to offer stability for a while, so they decided to go public. The Atlanta Police Department then started a GoFundMe page in honor of Ebony and her family. Chief Glazier wrote on the page, "My goal is to pay her rent, food, medicine, and transportation for a year so she can continue to work and save money without the stress of wondering if her family will be homeless again." Initially, their goal was to raise $15,000, which they managed to accumulate in just a couple of days, but they decided to stretch it to $75,000 to help cover their medical expenses. They managed to raise $70,321.